Hello, and welcome to the LDCEP Topic Talk. My name is Bob Meek, and I'm with the New York State Independent Living Council, and our discussion today is about talking to elected officials. My guests today are Meghan Parker, Aaron Baier, and Cliff Perez. Thank you for joining us today. Now more than ever, it is important for people with disabilities to be proactive, to meet with elected officials, their staff, and to educate them about our needs and issues, and to demand actions concerning constituents from their various communities. Panel and you can decide who would like to speak first. One of the first questions we would like to explore is, what should our listeners understand before making contact with one or more of their elected officials? Let's call it background research.
Hi, well, this is Meghan Parker. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the New York Association on Independent Living, or NIAL. And I would say one of the first things you want to understand are your issues. What do you want to meet with your elected official about? So you want to have a good understanding of your issue, know exactly what you want to say in a concise manner, because often you won't have that much time with your elected officials. So you definitely want to come prepared with materials and to know exactly what you want to say for the meeting.
This is Cliff Perez. I'm the systems advocate for the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley. Obviously, what Megan said is, obviously correct. You want to know what your issues are. You also want to be very clear that you know what the issues are from the point of view of where things really are as opposed to where you want things to go. Sometimes people get confused between the way things really are and the way we want them to be. I mean, obviously the whole idea of going to your legislators is to make things the way you think that they should be. So you need to be very clear about where they are and where you want them to be. The other thing that's very important is that don't get bogged down with needing or thinking that you need to speak to the legislator, him or herself. The aides are just as good, if not better, from the point of view that, especially if the legislator doesn't have a particular point of view, it's really good for when you speak to the aides, who will then take down notes. They will take down what you say. They will be a lot more. They will ask you a lot more questions because they want to be informed, so that when they go report back to the legislator, they can answer their legislator's questions or be as informed as possible. So there's nothing wrong whatsoever with speaking to the aide. It can be extremely helpful. So that's another good thing to do. And always try to put the power back on the person you're talking to. In other words, whenever you know something, act as if you don't know it, or at least you're inquiring, so that you put it back on them to explain to you what the situation is.
So yeah, this is Aaron Baier. I'm the systems advocate with Access to Independence. One of the things that I always do, whether I'm reaching out to an elected official that I've got a relationship with, or it's one that I'm meeting for the first time, is I want to check out their website. I check out their social media accounts. Do they have a position on the issue or a related issue to what I want to talk to them about? If you can go in there and you know it's going to be like hitting your head against a brick wall, you want to know that going in. If you know they're going to be on your side from your first sentence, you want to know that going in. Because if you go into it expecting it to be an easy conversation and it's a brick wall, you're not going to be as well prepared to handle that, and that can lead to some frustrating conversations. And we'll get to this later, I'm sure, but that's not going to be helpful when building and developing that relationship.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, although we covered it a little bit, another question is, what are some things to consider when preparing for a visit with an elected official? We've touched on a few, but certainly there may be other things.
This is Megan again. I think one thing you want to do in preparing is deciding, if you're going with a group of people, who is going to play which role. So typically when you go in and you're speaking to an issue, you probably want to have one person who does most of the talking and kind of leads the meeting. And you definitely want to have another person who's taking notes. You may speak to a couple different issues, and you may have someone in your group who has a personal story to share, and you want to know that going in and make sure they have that opportunity to share that story. particularly with our community, with the disability community. We have very compelling personal stories, and that can often be one of our greatest assets in terms of getting through to a legislator or an official on why we want them to do something for us. And yet we want to be very organized about that when we go in. We want to make sure that who's ever going to tell their story has the chance to practice it ahead of time, is prepared to speak on it. And we just want to be very clear about what roles we're each going to play before we get into that meeting.
Well, this is Cliff. I think what is part of what Aaron said before is very important to do your research in terms of going to the website. For me, especially in terms of finding out as much personal information that you can about the legislator is very helpful. It's very helpful to know, and especially that we're dealing with disabilities, it's very important to know whether or not the legislator has any contact with anybody. Does he have any relatives that have a disability? Does him or herself have a disability? It's good to know that. It's good to know as much personal information about them, because the most effective way to bring about change is to be as personal as possible. In other words, you want to make whatever issues you're bringing to the table to be as personal as possible to the legislator. If it connects with the legislator, there's a much better chance you're going to have in influencing that legislator. So I would definitely say, take a look at their biographies, get to know a little bit about them, and it never hurts if you have the time, because as Megan said too many times, we don't have the time, but if you have the time to be able to just talk about just regular talk, just like you would talk to anybody, to make it again, to give it that personal touch before you go into your issue. So that's just another suggestion.
These are great points so far. One thing I guess I would add is being respectful is really important. So as Cliff was saying, and Megan, kind of going in with a plan of action. Who's going to say what? Who's going to kind of lead the charge and kind of lead the group? Those are really important things to keep in mind. If you go in with a plan, knowing what you're up against, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of maintain that respect for the elected official, even if they don't agree with you. And I think that that's probably going to be one of the most important factors right there, is just maintaining a level of respect for that official. Another thing that I would really look at when preparing is what other stakeholders think about this issue. So let's take an issue like transportation. From a disability perspective, we're really seeking like equal access, making sure that buses and taxis are accessible. But how does that issue impact other stakeholders, and what are their opinions? If you can go in to this meeting with some collaboration that broadens the issue to a much bigger group of people, and legislators really will listen to that, so that it's not just an isolated issue, it's much broader than they think it is, or than they knew it was. And I think that's a really effective way to prepare.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, another question that needs to be answered, and this is sort of thinking broadly with the relationship with the official, what strategies can you suggest to develop a relationship with elected officials and their staff?
This is Aaron. I'll jump in. From point one or point A to point Z, I mentioned respect before, and I think that from the time you make the phone call or send the email to the elected official, you're being flexible to their busy schedule. You are being gracious, and you are thanking them for taking the time to meet with you. When you sit down with them, it's always thank you for your continued support. It's kind of a mantra, and that just puts out the fact that you respect that they're taking the time to meet with you. And I think that it helps get the conversation off on the right foot. And then, as Cliff mentioned before, make it a little personal. I think that we shouldn't forget that as a really effective tool.
Well, I was going to say that, as we've been talking about, getting to know the person is very, very important. I think it helps a lot if you come into a meeting to know a little bit something about the legislator, and especially if you can raise an issue about something that they had done before. Either they voted for something or they supported something that you approved of. It's really good to start the meeting off on a positive note about, hey, I really like what you did with this particular issue. That was really good, blah, blah, blah. Anything that will make it more personal, as I said before, between you and the legislator, to have a relationship more than just an advocate and a legislator, but as an interested or concerned citizen with your legislator. It helps to just develop that relationship. Fortunately, since I'm in the Capital District, I do go to the legislature a lot, and that helps to get to know them more personal, and they get to know me, and that helps a lot when I go to meetings and they know who I am. So just being known is a tremendous help. And even if you can't be here, like just call from time to time, see how things are going, to thank them for all the great work they're doing, just so that you be known. All of that is very, very helpful.
This is Megan. I completely agree with everything Aaron and Cliff said. Obviously being respectful and starting the conversation out with something that they did that you liked or something that may be happening in your local community that they're working on that you support is a great way to show that you're engaged, you know what they're doing, and that you support it. In addition, I would also suggest starting out your meeting after that, explaining who you are and if you're with an organization to make sure that, they understand, okay, this is Cliff Perez from the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley. I don't know what that organization is. It's Cliff's opportunity to explain all the great work the organization does, and then you've not only made a personal connection, but you're helping to make a connection to your organization with that legislator as well. In addition, I would just suggest, in terms of any follow-up, always send a thank you note, whether it's just a quick email or, something through the mail is great too. But you'll often, whether it be from the elected official themselves or Cliff mentioned, there's a good chance you'll meet with an aide. You'll get their business card. Send them a note. Thank them for meeting with you. Resend any materials you handed out at the meeting. If they had any questions, it's a great opportunity to follow up with them and give them an answer. And it just solidifies that connection you made in that meeting. And it can be really helpful to keep your issues in their mind and to build that connection you made with them in that meeting.
Thanks, Megan. Now, we have to ask a question about things not going as well as one might have hoped. What do you do when you get nowhere with the elected official or if the issue goes south on you or things just go badly all around on the particular issue?
Clearly, you don't want to take issue with the legislator or the person you're speaking with. I mean, when I say take issue, obviously you want to let them know if you have a particular position, what your position is, even if it is different from theirs, because obviously what would be the point? You're there to express to them whatever position it is you have or whatever your issue is that you're going to see them for. So, but you want to do it, as has been said a few times here, as respectful as possible. For example, I remember dealing with a legislator regarding the voting machine, and I remember that the legislator supported the voting machine that was inaccessible. And I remember thinking, oh my God, well, he supports this thing that's inaccessible, and this is the thing we can't use. So, again, when I said about not disagreeing with them, what I said was, I agree with you. This is a good machine. Because there is aspects about it that was good, and so I want to acknowledge that so I don't sound totally against them, and just said, you're right, it is a good machine, and I explained for what purposes it is good, and I said, but for these other purposes, I explained, it's not so good, and perhaps if you use this, you might want to do this to take, to sort of help out those folks who cannot use that particular machine, something like that. So you want to agree with them, but if you can, obviously. If you can't, you can't. But I think you can always find something that you can agree on, and then from there, sidestep it or nudge it towards the direction that you want and point out what it does or it does not do that you think is important, and how then, if you use this particular method that they support, then how you might want to address that issue by using another method or doing something else while still not negating what they wanted to do, and let them figure out on their own, possibly this is not the best way, maybe I should do, but you want them to try to figure that out on their own instead of you telling them. Nobody wants to be told what to do, so you want to minimize it as much as possible.
This is Megan. I agree with everything you just said, Cliff. I do think sometimes, and it really depends on who the elected official is and how much power they have in the situation, but sometimes we do in the disability community take it a step further, and sometimes we do have to engage in direct action or some kind of rally or protest. If there is an elected official who is being obstructionist, sometimes part of the legislative processes. A bill has to go through committees, and sometimes we'll find a situation where the chair of that committee does not want to put the bill we're supporting on the calendar so that the committee can vote on it, and they can hold up the whole process just by virtue of refusing to do that. That's one example. And so sometimes we do need to put pressure on those officials, and sometimes it's as much as sending out action alerts and really organizing our community to make a lot of phone calls, to send a lot of emails, to really try to put pressure on that official to move the bill or to at least give it a chance by putting it up for a vote. Sometimes, we have groups like ADAPT in the disability community who will engage in civil disobedience. That's a more extreme example. Sometimes we have to do that.
Yes, 100%. And to kind of piggyback off what Meghan was saying, she mentioned ADAPT. It's really great to know who your allies are in an issue, whether it's ADAPT or whether it's NIAL or your local independent living center or a local advocacy group that you work with. Know who your allies are and get them involved if they're not already. Make them aware of the issue that you're having with a particular legislator and see what they can do to kind of help you advance that issue. There's power in numbers, which is what community organizing is really all about. One other strategy that we've used is bring that elected official to your own turf. So when a legislator doesn't necessarily listen, we've traveled to Albany, they're being obstructionists, they're just not listening. We want to try to immerse them in the issue. If there's an open house or an event happening at your local independent living center, if your advocacy group that you're working with is meeting and talking about a particular issue, invite them to it. They may not show up, but they might. Keep an eye out for local town hall meetings. Keep an eye out for when that legislator, elected official is coming to your hometown, and go to their event. Be present, be a face. They will get to know you, and that relationship will continue to build the more they see you.
I just want to jump in with one last strategy that we didn't mention, but can sometimes be really helpful, is going to the media. Sometimes we need to bring these issues public, especially if we believe that coverage on our issue would sway public opinion and may sway the public and official to support our priorities. So holding a press conference at your organization or with other groups, perhaps coming together in Albany. Last year during the budget session, Niall held a press conference with several assembly members, and it was a great event. And so sometimes that is another way to put public pressure on an official who is not supporting your priorities.
Great. Thanks, Meghan. Does anyone have any final thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think this is Cliff. I think that, like what Aaron said before, it's extremely important to know your allies and to try and work with other organizations who also have a similar issue. For example, quite a few years ago, when we were trying to get Timothy's Law passed, I worked with the National Association of Social Workers, which is very rare, but this was an issue that was important to them for their own particular reasons. So it was good working with them and other organizations. So we worked very collaborative to get this passed. And in fact, this also speaks to an issue that Meghan raised earlier about people with power. It was the time when Senator Bruno was a majority leader, and as the leader of the House, the Assembly, or the Senate, they have the power to either put something on the floor or not put it on the floor, regardless of what kind of support it has. So I remember at the time we kept hearing that, a lot of senators supported Timothy's Law, but it wouldn't come onto the floor. And I remember hearing from Senator Bruno's office that, they don't really support it. They're just saying that, whatever. So my response to them was, then put it on the floor then, because you'll have nothing to lose. If you said that they're not really supporting this, so then therefore if you put it on the floor, then you'll win out and they won't vote for it. So again, it's just good to know information, good to know where people are coming from, good to have allies to work with. No matter how good of a systems advocate you are, no systems advocate can truly do effective systems advocacy without the help of others, whether it's individuals or groups, but definitely others, as it was mentioned also about strength in numbers, which is very, very true. So that's the other thing I would just like to add.
And just to kind of continue that thought, knowing the opposition. I mean, obviously not who is opposing, but rather why are they opposing? Is it because they say it's a money issue? Is it because it's a philosophical issue with what we're proposing or what you're proposing? Try to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit and understand that opposition, get to know that opposition, because while you might disagree with it, the more you can understand where they're coming from, the more you can kind of bring yourself to where they are and lift them up to where the issue needs to be.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Those were some excellent points you all made on all the issues. Really appreciate it. And our panelists, Meghan Parker, Aaron Baier, and Cliff Perez, thank you very much. I should mention that anyone can search out advocacy materials on the web on how to talk to elected officials. The LDCEP website, www.ldcep.org, has 2 references under resources. On the advocacy page, 2 links to check out include advocacy training package from the University of Kansas and community organizing ground rules for grassroots organizers from WNYIL. Any other materials to recommend from the panel?
Well, I do have a write-up that I could send if you want to on what I call effective methods of doing systems advocacy.
Great. We could post that on the website. Terrific. Anything else from any of the panels?
ilny.org. I think Meghan might know a little bit about them too, but they have some good advocacy materials on their website.
Yeah, if you go to the Statewide Systems Advocacy Network, SSAN, section of NIL's website at ilny.org, you'll find all kinds of materials in terms of preparing to meet with officials, running meetings, and all kinds of advocacy-related materials there. So check it out.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. Please join us for future podcasts and be an active member of LDCEP. Visit the site at www.ldcep.org. Thanks very much.
Thank you.